Thank you, Susan. Well, welcome everyone to the 5th session of the AASPI Speaker Series. My name is Russell Mason, Vice President of AASPI and your MC for tonight. Before I start, I'd like to ask everyone if they could keep their devices set to mute to reduce background noise during the presentation. And also, as per the other sessions, if you have any questions or you want to chat during the presentation, please type them into the chat function of your Zoom screen. Our AASPI President and moderator for tonight, Susan Bruniolti, will pose your questions to Denise at the end of her talk. So this session, like our previous sessions, will be recorded and uploaded to the AASPI YouTube channel. You can find our past presentations here also. For easy access to that channel, follow the links from the AASPI website. And remember to hit the subscribe button to be alerted for future uploads and help us increase the channel's visibility on the web. Okay, so tonight's speaker, we have AASPI member, Melbourne-based photographer, Denise Lawry. Denise is a conceptual artist and will talk about how she uses the street photography genre to explore her concepts and ideas. Currently studying her Masters of Art Photography, Denise has joined AASPI last year after attending a Melbourne workshop with the world-renowned Indian street photographer, Vineet Vohra. In 2019, Denise exhibited her work in our showcase exhibition, Shot in the Heart of Melbourne, and her work was also displayed at this year's Street Beats exhibition at Michael's Camera Store and Gallery. Tonight, Denise will talk us through the creation of a recent body of work titled Melbourne Lanes, Alleys and Arcades. So on behalf of the AASPI committee, I'd like to welcome all members and guests to this presentation. And without further ado, it's over to you, Denise.
Thank you, Russell. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation to talk to this group this evening. Can you hear me? Okay, is that? Yeah. Okay. Tonight, I'd like to show you a body of work that I completed last year as a requirement for the final year of an advanced diploma in photography in the art major stream, and this was at Photography Studies College in Southbank. There were 8 of us in the year, and Sue Bruniolti was a classmate. This work was developed in just under 12 months and culminated in an exhibition at the Yarra Sculpture Gallery in Abbotsford. Several images were also selected for the summer exhibition at Photography Studies College in December, and others formed part of the Memento exhibition at the Magnet Galleries in February this year. Tonight, I'd like to go through the steps that were involved in developing this folio, and I'll also show you some of my early work and its evolution into the final body of work. The red thread was something that we were asked to do, was an exercise that we were asked to do at Photography Studies College early on in the year. It was a fascinating exercise. We were asked to look at our lives essentially and discover a consistent theme or continuing element that runs through all aspects of our lives. We had to examine our life, our upbringing, our childhood, our likes and dislikes in terms of musical, artistic, photographic, favourite photographers. And then we had to draw them all together and find out what motivated us, what actually drives us and makes us the person that we are. So, this was these were the sections that I divided my presentation into in terms of the red thread, and you'll see there, I won't go through them but in detail, but basically there was a self-analysis, again, favourite art forms and artists. We also had to look at our previous creative output and look at some of our recent work, and then also look at some photographers and artists that we enjoyed, and then draw them all together into a list of recurrent themes in our life. So for me, there were quite a few that came up, but The ones that really stood out were ones involving loss, control, sorrow, and escape, amongst others. And for many of us, it was quite a confronting exercise. You know, it was almost, as one of my classmates said, it was almost like being in the confessional some days in our classroom, where we were going through and reading out what we'd discovered. So it's a very interesting exercise if you ever sort of think you'd like to do it. And then we put together a mind map. This was a crazy one that I put together, and essentially I took the theme of control as one of the major ones in my life, and then looked at things that radiated out from it and how they actually integrated and interacted. And again, that's a very interesting exercise to do. My visual influences tended to be, it was again another interesting and insightful exercise, that all the photographers that I absolutely love are all photographers who came or belong to the humanist school of photography. So Joseph Kudelka is one of my favourite photographers. So the humanists, and many of you will be familiar with Eric Kim, the street photographer. His definition there was that humanist photographers are sociologists with cameras, using the camera as their research tool. They're trying to understand the world and their fellow human beings through the agency of a camera. So as a result of this rather revealing investigation, it became apparent that ideas of control and domination exerted by authority figures in my upbringing have very much shaped the early and subsequent parts of my life. My father was a strict, domineering man with very high expectations for his family in both a physical and academic sense. He controlled us with an iron grip that we often resented and did not understand. The logical extension of this was a desire for freedom, both physically and psychologically. Reading, music and other creative outlets and observations and reflections on human behaviour are methods that I have always used to assist in managing my life and as a means of escape. This curiosity about human activity in various circumstances and a desire to capture everyday life in public places with candid images led to my love of street photography. So, and there was definitely a predominance of street photography in my own work. A lot of my work is monochrome, often with a solo subject, generally female. So I decided that I would put these features into my folio. So then we looked into various aspects of what we wanted to do in our folio, or I did, and I looked into the building of large cities and the architecture and the planning that went around them, and it seemed that modern cities were not really constructed with women in mind. They are generally designed by men for men, and they're often difficult for women to negotiate because either of safety issues, such as poorly lit streets at night, or physical barriers, you know, the difficulty in actually negotiating a street if you have a pusher or carrying various things. Also, the idea of constant surveillance, particularly in the urban space, is also something that I looked at, and I looked at Foucault's work and description of the panopticon, which was a metaphor for modern society, where it creates consciousness of permanent visibility as a form of power. So particularly in the city, CCTV and other forms of social media exert psychological control by subtle means, altering and modifying behaviour at a subconscious level. So I put together my first body of work, I entitled Urban Women City Limits. And in that work, I aim to explore the means that women use to interact with and negotiate their way through the urban space. I wanted to look at the impact of restrictions caused by gender and how maybe the female response differed from that of the male. And by doing this, it hopefully would provide knowledge that would assist in the understanding of one's own behaviour and reactions, and really give an existential reflection upon the deeper meaning of life and one's role in the universe. So I had all those sort of lofty goals. So the way that I worked was I kept visual diary, both a large and a smaller one. I printed lots and lots of images out at Officeworks, where they were relatively inexpensive and you could print in quite a large size. I used a whiteboard and put lots of visual references up, and also my own work, and was continually arranging and rearranging. Read lots and lots, and also looked at lots of other photographers' work. I spent a great deal of time in the central business district, and we had a great deal of feedback both from our teachers and our peers. So I tried to have work available for critique each week, and there was a constant cull of work that wasn't suitable, and at the time I also tried to maintain an optimistic outlook, although sometimes I must admit I felt that I would never ever get a body of work together because nothing was ever good enough for, yeah. And so eventually I did get some images together, and that led to this initial folio, which, as I said, was called Urban Women City Limits. So these are some of the images that I put together. I'll just run through them. So I found quite a few places in the city where and I'm sure you're all familiar with them, where there are lots of mirrors and windows and reflections. I went into the National Gallery. I haunted the lanes and arcades and South Bank. That's at the National Gallery. So that was my first body of work, and when looking at it critically, the images, whilst they were technically quite competent and they were well printed, because these were all printed out, they seemed to lack a bit of a spark. There was something that just wasn't right, and they really didn't fully show my voice or the emergence of a style that was obviously mine. The images were rather disparate, and they ranged from those showing isolation in the urban environment to feel-good portraits to interaction between people. So I felt that there was much more work that needed to go into this, my final folio. So I continued shooting a large number of images, and it was at this time that I found 3 photographers that absolutely inspired me, and I really think made an enormous difference to my work, and they were Fan Ho, Daido Moriyama and Melissa Breyer. With respect to, well, all three are street photographers, and they all work predominantly in monochrome, although both Moriyama and Breyer do colour work. They're all masters, absolute masters of light, and in Moriyama's case, he does these gritty, grainy, and often out of focus images, which I absolutely love, and he's the master of the photo book as well. He's put together hundreds of photo books, as you'd all know. Breyer used shop windows, mirrors and reflections, and also included large billboards and posters showing human subjects that became part of her composition. So here's just some of Fan Ho's work, just this magnificent use of light in alleys and in the streets of Hong Kong predominantly, I think. Just beautiful. And that's his most famous one, The Shadow Approaching. Daido Moriyama's work, his famous dog. Sorry, they're a little out of focus, sorry. And Melissa Breyer's work, which is really, I really love the complexity of her work with the layers and the gaze as well. So with that in mind, I decided that that I would, with the rest of my work, I would perhaps not necessarily limit myself or restrict myself to female subjects, and I'd look for locations where, with good light and contrast, avoid portraits, and also attempt to add an air of mystery to the story and make the people, so that I'd make the viewer really look and think about the images. And also explore women in the urban space, but include couples and males for comparative purposes. So my final body of work was entitled Laneways, Alleys and Arcades. And because just in looking at all the images, they were consistently taken in the little streets and back alleys of Melbourne. We had to put together an artist statement. So this was my artist statement. Essentially, my passion is to shoot people existing within their environments. I'm able therefore to capture transitory moments, permitting glimpses that show we are all connected by our basic humanity. These images were taken away from the main streets of the Melbourne CBD, off the beaten path, predominantly in laneways, alleys, arcades, and the countless little streets of Melbourne, all hidden treasures of our city. So for exhibition, I selected 5 of my strongest images, and they were printed. They were huge prints, extremely difficult to transport to the gallery. That was a logistical nightmare, but and also a photo book. We advertised widely our exhibition, and this was a media release that was put out. This was some work from a classmate, Agatha Mays, that some of you I'm sure will know, very talented photographer. And then this is us setting up the exhibition at the gallery. You might recognise Sue there. Sorry, it's a back view, but these were my images, and the workman's bag there, adding a splash of red. But in the corner there was the stand on which I had my photo book. These images were selected and arranged in that way because the gaze of the subject seemed to flow from left to right. These are just some larger views of those images. I was much happier with this work because it had a lot more complexity to it and layers and reflections. So there was more to it than the previous work. This was taken in a shop in the city called Alpha 60 with this fellow sort of overlooking the shop assistant in a fairly sinister way. It's interesting, I went into the shop to find out later who that fellow was, and that's Jean-Luc Godard, the famous French director who in the 60s put together the film Alphaville, the science sci-fi film, and the owners of this shop love his work so much that they based their fashion upon it. So he's there looking down. This was the cover of the photo book that I put together, and the font of the title is actually the font that was used in early Melbourne days in the lanes and arcades and alleys. So these were the images that were in the photo book. So I'll run through these. So taken in the arcades with when the light was more appropriate, and then I like to find lots of reflections and let's go back to that one. So that was the work that I put together last year for the folio. Much happier with that the final outcome. So now, being a beggar for punishment, I've enrolled to do a Master of Arts in Photography at PSC, and I'm just in my first semester. So I decided to actually build on that previous body of work, and I've just put together a proposal for further work, and I've called it Cityscape Walking with a Flaneuse. As the flaneuse is the female equivalent of the French the flaneur, the sort of dandy gentleman of 19th century Paris that would sort of saunter through the streets of Paris observing life. So the flaneuse is the female equivalent as described by Lauren Elkin in her book Flaneuse, A Walk Through the Cities, Famous Cities. There are lots of questions. We had to put together some research questions. I won't run through all of these, but essentially these are the main ones. Lauren Elkin believes that space is a feminist issue, and so she says that from Tehran to New York, from Melbourne to Mumbai, a woman still can't walk in the city the way a man can. So I'd like to investigate that a bit more fully. she also talks about invisible boundaries and barriers that are present in cities, and I'd like to look into that a bit further and see if I can depict those things photographically. Also, I'd like to look at how gender differences can be demonstrated photographically. And in fact, does a flaneuse exist? In fact, is it possible to undertake a flaneuserie and change the way that a woman walks through space? And then I've sort of touched upon the concepts of psychogeography, which is a very interesting area. I still have trouble saying that, so I have to really think about it. But and also, again, looking at constant surveillance, does it affect behaviour in the city, and are there gender differences in this? I think there are a lot. That's a huge sort of amount of things that I'm trying to look at, but I think it's at this stage it's probably better to have a lot of things and then refine it down. But I think somewhere in there I'll find something to do a body of work about. In terms of psychogeography, that's was described by Guy Debord in 1955 as a study of precise laws and specific effects of the geographical environment. But Joseph Hart had a much friendlier definition for it. He called it a whole toy box full of playful, inventive strategies for exploring cities. Just about anything that takes pedestrians off their predictable paths and jolts them into a new awareness of the urban landscape. And the geographers talk about something called the dérive. That's French for drift. And so they just head off into a city and might just say, okay, well, today we're just going to do 2 left turns and then a right turn and then another left turn. So they have no actual plan. They have a plan, but it's not sort of the conventional one. Another psychogeographer that I read about suggested finding the cameras in the city and heading in the direction of the cameras pointed until you come to another camera, and then follow that camera. So just follow your way all around the city, directed by the cameras. So all very interesting. So then I thought, well, I wonder if there are any psychogeographers in Australia. I'm very new to this area, so there are quite a few. And Vanessa Berry is in Sydney. She's written a book called Mirror Sydney, where she looks at various areas of Sydney and describes them and her walk. And Nick Gadd, who has a book that's coming out soon. He's an author, which involves, he runs a website called Melbourne Circle, and he has been walking all around Melbourne with his wife. His wife sadly passed away recently, but he's the master of the ghost signs. So his book will be looking at the ghost signs around Melbourne. So I'd quite like to, if anyone knows any people that I could get in touch with in this respect, I'd be very grateful, because I'm really very interested in this area. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Susie, I think you're on mute if you've been saying stuff.
How about I unmute myself and then I'll talk?
Way to go.
Thanks so much, Denise. I really appreciate you sharing your inspirations, your ideas, your themes, I guess in what we would term conceptual street photography. Would you agree?
Yes, yes, definitely. You know, I think street photography, as I have practiced it in the past, is very much sort of spontaneous and you know, maybe a single shot here and there. But I think having to actually come up with concepts and ideas and an actual plan was, yeah, definitely puts it into the conceptual area. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I really loved your inspirations as well. I'm certainly a fan of Melissa Breyer's work, and I can see how she's inspired you in the reflections and certainly the billboards that you've captured in and around Melbourne. I've also got one of Dado Moriyama's book. I really love his work as well. So I've just got a question about one of our members is asking, is your book for sale? And if so, where can we purchase your book?
I only printed 2 copies. I'd hate to say how much they cost, but I certainly I do plan to print some more. So that could be done if you know, if there was some interest, I guess. Yeah. So it's certainly, yeah. In terms of a cost, I'm sorry, I couldn't really say at this stage.
That's okay, no worries. Yeah, know that people are interested, so perhaps, yeah, maybe print some more, Denise.
Add it to all my prints here, which are taking over the house, much to my family's annoyance.
So we've got Angela Barrow saying she's putting her hand up for a copy right now.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. Okay.
So we've got some lovely positive comments coming through. Thanks so much, Denise. So interesting and inspiring. Also, Terry saying that he heard Nick on 3RRR years ago talking about psychogeography walks some years ago. Also, other people saying great session. Thanks. Love the concept of psycho. I also have trouble saying that word. Psychogeography.
It's a shocking word to try and say. I have great trouble with it.
So I've got a question for you, Denise. So all your work is in black and white. Did you shoot any work in colour, or why did you choose to go monochrome?
For this body of work, I think I don't really think colour added anything to it. I wanted it to look very cohesive, and I think that with the monochrome, it allowed me to get really high contrast, a really striking contrast. Whereas I think with colour, that perhaps would not have quite have been as cohesive. Yeah. But I do shoot in colour. I really enjoy working with colour, but I seem to always gravitate towards monochrome for some reason.
Well, I guess your 3 major influences or inspirations all shoot in monochrome too, don't they?
And most of the humanist photographers that I love are all work in monochrome. Yeah, so there's definitely something, a consistent theme there, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I can see that humanist influence coming through in your work. I've got a question about the final exhibition. So how and why 5 prints in the final exhibition? did you want to put in more or less, or how did you come up with the final selection?
Oh, yeah. I wanted to print have really large prints because I wanted the images to look really almost overwhelming, that they were so large, and because it's very much about the gaze and being watched, and there. So I thought, and our teacher also had a bit of a, input here, or a fair bit of input, and she said, print as large as you can. So that's what I did. Initially, I was thinking of 3, but it was dependent on the wall, the space of the wall as well that I was given. So 5 just seemed like a good number, really, and I think they were the 5 strongest images. But I had all these other, so many other images that I really needed to do something with. I just felt, I've got all this work, what can I do with it? And that's when the idea of the photo book came up, and I'm so glad I did that, because that was a lot of fun, actually. I really enjoyed that, because I've got fold outs and all sorts of things in that book. You can't really see them on the screen, but there's all sorts of little funny things in that book. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And how many prints or how many images are in your book, Denise?
I think there'd probably be between maybe 70, something like that. Yeah, there's quite a lot, quite a few. I think it's about 70. So also including the ones that were, as prints, large prints.
Yeah, sure. We've got some questions coming in. So a question, did you get any release forms signed for your work?
No, I didn't. No, because most of the images, probably all of them, were taken. I mean, I never actually interacted with the subject. It was, taken at a distance, and I didn't feel I needed them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. We've got another question here. Who did you print your book with? And are you using a plugin?
Oh, I printed my book with Bambara Press. And who was it? Louise Tate. And she helped me with the design. Also a fellow called, I've forgotten his name, sorry. But anyway, they were really good and very helpful. Do I use plugins? Yes, I use Silver FX Pro, but there was a lot of what's the word? My own. I didn't just use the change. Let's say noir or whatever. For example, noir 1 or whatever. I didn't just use it as it came out. I actually did a lot of custom work in it, and I worked very closely with our wonderful printer at PSC, Peter Hatzipavlis, and he taught me a lot about actually the use of grain and putting in some colour. There's some very subtle colour, some blue in those images. So whilst I did use a plug-in, I also put in a lot of my own alterations and things.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think the plug-in question was more around from Lightroom to Blurb or straight to a book publisher.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I totally misunderstood that.
No, that's okay. You answered the question anyway by saying, yeah.
Sorry, I gave the files to Bambara, and we then sort of went through and laid them out, and they'd work on it then and send me a proof, and then I'd say, oh no, I don't, don't like this, change this and whatever. So no, I didn't use, no, I just gave them the straight files.
Was there any reason that you decided to go down that route instead of?
Well, the thing was, I was running out of time, and I knew that I really didn't have time myself to be trying to put it together and, trying to learn something like, one of those programs. So I thought, well, I'll find a printer that's able to actually do a lot of that work for me. So that's the real reason, really. I just ran out of time. I had so much to do at that stage. We were pretty busy, weren't we? Yeah.
Yeah, that's an understatement. We have another question from one of our members here. So Ananda asks, Denise, do you think or see in monochrome? Do you shoot and look in monochrome on your camera, or do you shoot colour and then apply monochrome at the computer?
I always shoot in colour, and then change it, apply it in post-processing. But I think that I'm getting to the point where I can sort of determine what might make a good monochrome image. So I suppose in a way I think in monochrome at times, but as I always shoot in colour. Although I did work with, I did a workshop with a French street photographer called, a French-American street photographer called Valerie Jardin. You might know her. She's published lots of books and things now. She made us shoot in black and white. She just said no colour. So that was a very interesting exercise. She made us, yeah, she uses the Fuji camera, Fujifilm cameras, and she just shoots in black and white. But basically colour.
Yeah, wow. So another question here from Russell. Have you been getting out and about in the street during lockdown? And if so, would you incorporate this into your work?
That's a good question, Russell. For the first lockdown, I was extremely fortunate and to be down at Lawnweave, a place down there, and that was a really interesting time. I did a lot of shooting there on the beach, and also sort of in the streets. In fact, I did a series of the shops and things down there, which form part of an isolation series. But for this lockdown, I'm in Melbourne, and I really haven't done much work at all. I need to get out into and do some work because we have a folio to present in November. At times I haven't done anything yet, so I really need to get out somewhere into the city or roundabout. But I don't. The work that I did down at Lawn, I really can't use for my master's work, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky times for street photography.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really not sure what I'm going to do. I'm quite worried, actually, about that.
Sure. Yeah, I could imagine. Are there any more questions from any of our listeners? I think that's it, Denise. You've wowed us. It's certainly a different way to shoot street photography, I think. having a concept or an idea in mind to create a body of work versus, I think, you know, probably going out and thinking, well, you know, it's an F8 sunny day and going out to shoot shadows, shapes, or textures. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. It's been wonderful. And if we don't have any more questions, it's back to you, Russell.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you very much, Denise, for your very personal and in-depth talk on the creation of your work. It was great to hear the evolution from work from the early projects and what you have done and where you were headed. It was great, and congrats on the further studies and kudos to you. It seems like you've got quite a lot of work ahead of you, especially in the lockdown time, so it must be difficult. So all the best for that. If anyone would like to see more of Denise's work, have a look at her website at deniselawry.com. deniselawryphotography.com, and her Insta feed at Denise Lawry. And speaking of Instagram, there are a lot of nice images being posted to the AASPI Insta feed for our monthly challenge of shapes, so you can check that out. For further information on what's going on at AASPI, visit aspi.com.au. Keep a look in your inbox for the newsletter. There's something coming out shortly, including some info on our AGM in November. So keep an eye out for that. And just finally, join us next week for our guest presenter, Melbourne photographer and AASPI member, Mark Davidson. Mark is an avid street photographer and was recently named as a finalist in Australian Photography 100 Awards. So join us the same time next week for another session of the AASPI Speaker Series. So good night. See you all then. Stay safe.
Sorry, Russ, it's not next week.
No,
it's the 29th. So we're going to fortnightly.
Okay, we're going to fortnight. That's the news to me. Thank you very much, Susie.
29th.
All right, see you everyone on the 29th.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Bye.